So please contact staff. Thank you. So please contact staff and we will provide translation services. To find out about additional meetings, go to Make Moraga Home on the town's website and register yourself by clicking Notify Me for updates. Okay, so just do this. Okay. So we'll be telling you more about the housing element in this presentation. And today we're going to start off with a brief presentation that provides the context for the housing element. In other words, how we got here and why we're here today. The presentation provides an overview of what a housing element is and the process that the town will be going through to update it. We'll have an opportunity for questions and discussions at the end of the presentation, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas with us. Today, we want to encourage you to type your questions or comments in the chat window during the presentation. And we'll have an exercise in just a moment to practice that. And we'd like to hear your housing story with us, either in the chat box or through email. We have a dedicated email address for this project, which is Make Moraga Home. And we welcome your ideas and messages at that address. All emails to that address will be answered. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I know that I came in a little bit late, but you said there were 3 of you that are part of the staff. Could you introduce yourselves?
That's
Yes.
actually our next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start with some introductions. Because this is such a large and complex project, I'm going to introduce you to the entire team. Not everybody's here today, but Cynthia Battenberg is the town manager. My name is Afsha Hamid, and I'm the planning director. Brian Horn is also in the department, and he's the associate planner. Mio Mendez is the assistant planner, and he's also in our department. And Susie Melee is here today, and she's the senior administrative assistant. To assist us with this project, we have Barry Miller, who's with us here today, and he's the project manager. And we also have assistance with by Matt Kauda, and he's with BAE Urban Economics. So for today's presentation, it's just going to be myself, Susie, and Barry. So since this is a big project, like I said, there's several of us that are working on it, but we're all familiar with the project. And if you want to contact us, we will be available to respond to questions throughout the life of this project. So I'm going to give it to Barry now.
Great. Thanks, Afsha, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It looks like there are 5 of you here, which is a nice opportunity for some direct Q&A and conversation. Please do bear with us. We would like to go through this PowerPoint presentation first, just to give you some context for why we're here today. The presentation and the format is designed for a larger audience, but it's fine. It works with a smaller audience as well. I do want to add, we had about 25 people at our first meeting and about 20 at our second meeting. We wanted to provide a Saturday option for those who couldn't make a noon or early evening weekday meeting. So we appreciate that you're here. We will likely continue to do some Saturday morning meetings throughout the process. And the fact that there are fewer of you just makes it better because we can have a more real conversation. So we put a couple of ground rules on the slide, and I don't know if the Q&A feature is active. You guys are a small enough group that we can just take your questions as we get to the end. We are going to try to get through the presentation in one fell swoop and then save questions to the end. We are going to ask you to put your microphones on mute during the presentation just to avoid background noise. So thanks for doing that. Please do be respectful of others' opinions. We know that there are a lot of different views on housing and different priorities, and this is really a listening session and just a chance to hear your thoughts and hear what we have to do as a community based on some new state laws that are applying to everyone in the Bay Area. We also want to remind you again, as Afsha said, that we have this email address, makemoraga@moraga.ca.us. You can see it in the bottom left of your screen. And please do email us at that address if you have thoughts on this topic, if you have ideas, if there's something you didn't get to say today. We are open to all suggestions. So this may seem a little silly with only 5 of you, but we do have some Zoom polling questions. We wanted to just see if you were from Moraga, worked in Moraga, and so on. So please, if you wouldn't mind participating in a couple of polling questions. Susie, I think, is going to bring these up on the screen so we can see them. Here we go. So you should, from your home computer, be able to indicate whether you live in Moraga are a homeowner in Moraga, a renter, live somewhere else in the county, or none of the above. I'm seeing everyone here so far is a homeowner in Moraga. There's a couple of you who haven't weighed in yet. Okay. So let's go on to the next polling question here. And this is, okay, just trying to, which is regarding workplace. And again, I'm sorry, Ashley, did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
I didn't see the questions and it wasn't able to answer, and I'm a homeowner.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting us know. And I know there was at least one other person who didn't weigh in on that either. Hopefully the technology is working for us. Great. So in terms of workplace, Ashley, do you want to just tell us if you're not able to weigh in? And
Now I can see it and I'm submitting it.
Cool. Great.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Yeah. So it looks like about 2 of you are working outside of Moraga and 2 of you are not currently working. And thank you for answering that one. We've got 2 more of these, I think. How long have you lived in Moraga? And there are 6 options here. And let's see if folks can answer this one. Interestingly, at the last couple of meetings, we have had the vast majority of answers to this question have been more than 20 years. So we've got a lot of longtime residents that have been participating in the process. Here I see one who's lived here 11 to 20 and 3 more than 20. Great. And then we're asking about your age. I'll explain why we're doing that in just a moment. Okay, great. So we've got 2 50 to 64 and 2 65 or older. Thank you for that. One of the things we're going to try to do in this process as we go through the next year is reach our 18 to 34s and 35 to 49s. Those age groups haven't participated in these kinds of processes to the level that we'd like to see. And so we have a number of things we want to do over the next year so that we can reach more of our younger folks as part of this process. And then the last polling question, which is how did you find out about this meeting? And we've got a bunch of different options on here. If you could let us know. Okay, it's a bit of a mix here. Email from a friend. We know it was in the newsletter. Okay. And someone has indicated other. That's great. All right. So I'm going to turn it back to Afsha now.
Great.
And we're going to move on with the presentation. Thank you for bearing with us on the polling.
Okay, so thank you, Barry, and welcome in everyone once again. We thought it would be helpful to start our presentation with some context for our conversation about housing. So can we close the poll, Barry?
Yeah, there should be no polls visible on the screen right now. Is that, I think the polls are, we're good.
Oh, that's odd. I'm seeing the poll result on the screen. Oh, okay, great. And I also see that Ashley has her hand raised.
That's not correct anymore. Don't see how to unlower it.
Okay, we'll take care of that for you. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll start my presentation. Are we on slide 11, Barry?
We are.
Okay, great. So during the last 10 years, the 9 Bay Area counties added approximately 1.3 million jobs. At the same time, we produced 140,000 units of housing, or roughly 1 housing unit for every 9 jobs that was created. The blue bars on this chart show the number of jobs each Bay Area county added between 2010 and 2019. The orange bars show the number of housing units every county added. You can see the ratio of jobs added to housing added above each set of the bars. In Contra Costa County, we added 109,000 jobs during the decade, and we built 18,000 housing units, or roughly 1 housing unit for every 6 jobs created. So we did a little better than the region as a whole, but there's still a large imbalance region-wide. As you see on this slide, all of the Bay Area counties added significantly more jobs than homes, in some cases by margins of more than 15-1. And although Santa Clara, San Francisco, and Alameda County saw the majority of the job growth, we've been impacted by the imbalance. By growing our economy without adding housing, we've seen longer commutes, more overcrowding, and households doubling up, and significant increases in housing prices. And I do want to say on these slides, we have listed the sources on where we are getting the data from. So you will see the source on these slides. Thank you. Next slide. So it's not just a tech boom. And it's not just the growth of high income jobs at Google, Facebook, and other large employers in Silicon Valley. The growth of these higher income jobs has also fueled growth in lower paying jobs that we hear less about in the news. Jobs in the service industry and in middle income professions like healthcare, education, and the creative arts. Jobs in retail, food service, childcare, and other sectors that don't pay as well as technology jobs that are driving the boom. On this chart, the orange bars show the number of jobs created by the income category in the Bay Area. And you can see we're doing a better job building housing for those in the above moderate income categories. These are the tech jobs and the higher paying jobs. We're not doing nearly as well when it comes to building housing for those in the middle income and lower income categories. In fact, very little of the housing we've built in the last decade is affordable to these workers, creating a large and growing gap in our housing market. Next slide, please. So when you have an imbalance between supply and demand, as we've seen here, one of the consequences is an increase in prices. This graph shows the median home value in Moraga over the last decade based on data from Zillow. We've seen an increase of more than 100% since 2012 alone in the town, with the median price increasing from $850 9 years ago to over 1.8 million today. While rents haven't gone up quite as steep, we've also seen rents increasing at a faster rate than income. Next slide. So this is about
care products. Automobile care.
We should down 14 always down to the right.
Thank you, Kendall. I appreciate that. So this slide is about the building for the missing middle. When you have Another factor behind high housing costs is what we're not building for what sometimes we call the missing middle of the housing market. The missing middle includes townhomes, duplexes, smaller apartment buildings, and other types of housing that used to be more common in our cities and towns than it is today. We've seen construction of costly single-family homes at one end of the market and larger, moderate density, more reasonably priced housing that's always been an important part of the housing market. We have good examples in the town, such as the duplexes at Moraga Country Club. Opportunities for first-time home buyers and young families are more limited than they used to be. In Moraga, data shows that our townhomes and condos are selling for roughly 1/2 the sales price of single-family homes, but there is very little inventory available. Next slide, please. So our service workers can't afford to live here anymore. One of the consequences of these changes is that our service workers they are having a harder time living in our community and in the Bay Area as a whole. The table shows the average wage in a number of jobs and occupations in Contra Costa County. What you also see is the percentage of one's annual income that is needed to afford the median price one-bedroom apartment in central Contra Costa County. So if you're a preschool teacher living alone in a one-bedroom unit, you may need to spend 74% of your income on your rent and utilities. If you're a police officer, you may need to spend 40% of your income on rent and utilities. It's getting harder and harder to make ends meet and have income left over for food, transportation, medical costs, and other expenses. Next slide, please. So there are benefits of increased housing choices. There are some real benefits to having more diverse mix of housing choices in our community. We can create more opportunities for young families to find a first-time home, something that's out of reach for many families with children right now. Think about whether you could afford the home you lived in today and may have raised your children in if the cost was 1.8 or 1.9 million at the time you purchased it. We can provide places for our kids to live as young adults. Right now, we know many of our kids will not be able to live in Moraga as adults because there are no affordable housing options for them. We can provide more options for seniors, making it easier to age in the community instead of moving to Rossmore or Lafayette or somewhere else with more choices for older adults. For example, buildings with elevators or single level living spaces or spaces that are a little smaller and require less maintenance than a large single family home. We can help people who work in the community like faculty at St. Mary's or employees at Safeway or local restaurants or local firefighters find housing locally instead of commuting an hour each way. And that shorter commute can also translate into less traffic and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and helps us achieve our climate goal for the future. And we can create stronger, more balanced communities that are inclusive and complete and provide a great place where everyone is welcome. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we can see you on your Zoom. So if your camera is on, we can see you. And if your microphone is on, we can also hear you. So you may just want to, if you're listening to the meeting, you may just want to turn your camera and your microphone off. Thank you. Okay. So why isn't the housing we need getting built? When you look at the data, one question that comes up right away is why isn't the housing getting built? And there's no one answer to that question. We're facing a complicated set of challenges that make it very difficult to find a solution. And no one city or town can solve this problem on its own. It's a regional issue that we have to solve together. Some of the factors are shown here. We have a limited amount of buildable land. Bay Area residents cherish the open space, the natural environment that makes our region beautiful and desirable to live in. We've preserved our hillsides. What we're left with are mostly small sites that have been skipped over by development or are already developed sites that are underused or might have been repurposed. It's much harder to develop these sites than vacant land. We also have a fiscal structure that favors commercial and industrial development over housing. Cities rely on sales tax, hotel taxes, business taxes, and other revenue sources that come from jobs. And they have policies that favor jobs over housing due to fiscal impacts, and the higher cost of providing services to residential areas. We have high land and construction costs. The cost of lumber has increased more than 300% in the last year alone. The cost of labor is high, other building materials are more expensive than they used to be, and the price of land is very expensive, especially when sites may have been used before and need demolition and cleanup before development. Our environmental review and project review process are absolutely critical, and we count on them to maintain our quality of life, but they're expensive and add time and money to the cost of construction. And finally, many projects face community opposition. This is not to say that opposition is wrong or bad, but it often produces better products, but it does result in projects being delayed and adding more expense and time to build. Next slide, please. So the state of California is stepping in. And I want to clarify for everyone that the requirement for the housing element is a state requirement. It is not council. It is not your local assemblymen's. It is not staff. This is driven by the state. And the state of California has gotten more aggressive in recent years by adopting new laws and requirements to get at the root cause of some of these factors. They've been particularly focused on eliminating constraints relating to community processes and opposition to development. So the laws you see here that are a list before you are only a small fraction of the bills that have been approved by the state legislature and signed by the governor in the last 4 years. And I'm sure that you've been reading about some of the more popular ones because they're already in the paper, like SB 9 and SB 10. The town council has received an update on some of these laws at the October 27th Housing Legislative Update, and we encourage you to go online and to watch that meeting. Staff also gave the council a update on October 6th, and that was a kickoff meeting, which has a more in-depth look, and it was a joint meeting with town council and the planning commission. So I encourage you to go to the town's website to look up those meetings as well. So, but the bottom line is that these laws have completely changed the landscape for what local governments can and can't do regarding housing in California, and a large part of why we're here today. So to tell you a little bit more, I'm going to turn it back to Barry to give you the nuts and bolts. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Afsha. And before we get into the nuts and bolts, we've got 2 more Zoom polling questions. These are actually trivia questions. So we recently got some new data from the US Census, and this is a question we'd like you all to take a guess on how many people Moraga gained between 2010 and 2020. So if you wouldn't mind, I see one person has voted. Okay. There are a couple of you who haven't weighed in on this, but let me cut to the chase in the interest of time and tell you that the correct answer is 850. So the town of Moraga gained 850 people during the decade based on census data. We're going to have a related question now, which is how many housing units did Moraga gain between 2010 and 2020? So Susie, if you could put up our poll. So again, 850 residents, and how many homes? Okay, for those who guessed or knew that it was 110, you win. The town added 110 homes during that decade, obviously adding about 8 times more people than housing units. The existing housing units in the town have more people per household than they did. The average number of persons per household in Moraga went up from about 2.5 to 2.66 over that decade. And kind of an interesting factoid, we'll be drilling down as to why and what that means for the town through this process. So we're going to go through just a couple of slides about the housing element right now and what the requirements are. Just for starters, this is not a new requirement. Cities and towns in California have been required to adopt housing elements for the last more than 50 years. The difference is the requirements have become a lot more extensive in the last few decades. So the housing element is part of the town's general plan. It's the only part of the general plan that has to be updated on a specific schedule that's set by the state of California, which is every 8 years. It's also the only part of our town's plan that has to be certified by the state of California. In this case, we have to submit the housing element to the California Department of Housing and Community Development once it's adopted for certification. It's also the most prescriptive part of the general plan. There are very detailed requirements for what we must do in this document. At the end of the day, we have to demonstrate to the state that we are doing our fair share to meet the region's housing needs. And that term fair share is actually a measurable term. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So in terms of what's in the housing element, there are these 5 basic buckets that you're gonna find in every housing element for every community in California. So we start out with a needs assessment, which is based on data from the US Census and other sources about our population, our housing stock. It looks at things like age of the population, household size, language barriers, family structure, as well as the special needs of persons with disabilities and extremely low incomes and seniors and so on. Second, there's an evaluation of our previous accomplishments. How did we do in achieving what we said we were going to do in our last housing element? So we adopted a housing element in 2015. It had a long list of programs. Did they get adopted? Did they get implemented? And if they didn't, why? So that's the next part. The third part is this evaluation of constraints to housing production. This includes things like our zoning regulations, our fees, our infrastructure, the fact that there are constrained environmental factors like wildfire hazards and so on. What are the factors that make it hard to build housing in our community? Then there's a section on resources, and most of that section focuses on sites. In other words, where in Moraga can housing be built and how many units of housing can be built on those sites? What are the financial resources to build housing? And finally, we're required to evaluate fair housing practices, including things like evictions, and lending patterns and so on. We are evaluating potential discrimination, and we need to ensure that our policies work toward a more inclusive community. So all 5 of those topic areas feed into new goals, objectives, policies, and actions, and all of this has to be done by January of 2023. So I mentioned this concept of fair share, which is how much housing do we have to plan for? This is not something that the town of Moraga gets to decide. It's actually a state number that goes from the top down from the state to ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is the regional council of governments that serves the 9 Bay Area counties. And then ABAG assigns each community a number, and they must update their housing element to show that they can accommodate that number. So about 2 years ago, the state of California determined that the need for the Bay Area, for the 9-county Bay Area, was 441,176 units. That number, which is quite large, about 2.5 times what it was during the prior housing element, that number then gets allocated to the individual cities through this process called the RHNA. And the RHNA is an acronym for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So the ABAG ultimately settled on a method for allocating the units that takes into consideration existing population, proximity to jobs, proximity to transit, and what they call high resource areas. So if you are a community that has good schools, economic opportunities, high incomes, the way that this method works is it assigns more housing to your community. So this is kind of driven by an equity component in the method and the formula that is aimed at achieving state housing objectives. So what it means for Moraga is that the number that that formula produced for the town is 1,118 units of housing. Just for comparison's sake, it was 229 units in the last cycle. So this represents an increase of about 400% over what we were asked to do 8 years ago. So the fact that we've been given an assignment of 1,118 units doesn't mean that the town needs to go out and build housing starting tomorrow over the next 8 years. What it means is that we need to show the state that we have the capacity in our town through our zoning primarily to let the private sector and the nonprofit sector construct this quantity of housing units over the next 8 years. It doesn't mean this quantity of units is going to get built. It means we have to show that we have room. We have made room for this number of units. So it's not just Moraga that saw a big bump in our assignment. You can see here the blue bars represent the RHNA numbers for the 2015 to 2023 period. That's the period we're in now. And the orange bars represent the next cycle that we're planning for now that will begin in 2023. So if you look at Orinda, Lafayette, Danville, Walnut Creek, and the other cities in the county, everyone saw very significant increases in our RHNA assignment. And it's not just 1,118 units. We can't go out and say, well, we've planned for 1,118 single family detached homes, therefore we're done. In fact, the homes are broken down by income based on the way this methodology works, and we can't only plan for above moderate income housing. Part of the point of this exercise is that we have to also show that we're planning for low and very low income housing, which typically means we have to zone land for multifamily housing. So you see these terms, low income, very low income, they're thrown around a lot, but what do they actually mean? The way this works is that the income is scaled based on the number of people in the household and based on the county in which the town is located or the city is located. In Moraga's case, Contra Costa County, a household of 4 that is earning $109,600 a year would be considered low income. So you can have 2 working heads of household and 2 kids in that household. If they're earning $109,000 a year, they're low income. So we're talking about housing for the workforce in many cases. The very low income households are, you can see here, under $68,500 for a household of 4. So we're looking primarily at rental apartments and housing types that we do have in Moraga, but in short supply. So when we talk about affordable housing for a low income household, what's the price we're talking about? And to figure that out, we use a state standard, which is a state and federal standard, which is that a housing should not consume more than 30% of a household's income. So if you're that household of 4 earning $109,000, divide that by 12 months of the year and take 30%, that's $2,740 a month. So if you're that household and you're spending more than $2,740 a month, the state and federal governments define your household as being cost burdened, which means you may not have enough money left over for other expenses, and ideally you'd be spending less than that on your rent. So we took a look at what housing costs were in typical Moraga apartments. These are actually from Craigslist ads There is some housing in the town that's affordable to low and very low income households, but not a lot. Excuse me, not a lot. And you can see in the right-hand column on this slide, the income one would need to earn for the rent being charged on these apartments to be considered affordable. So if you're, again, I'm just going to jump to the second one here. If you're living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment that's $2,800 a month, you would need to be earning $120,000 a year for that apartment to be considered affordable. And that also includes an allowance for your utilities. So what you take away from this slide is that we really don't have a lot of affordable housing. And as we think about the future and plan for the future, particularly for very low income households, we need to be creative and think about opportunities that don't exist today. So we mentioned earlier that the town needs to demonstrate that it has capacity for 1,118 units. One of the purposes of the housing element is to identify where those potential sites are. And we need to provide detailed information to the state in our housing element about housing sites. What we can count are approved projects that haven't been built yet. So if there's an apartment building that's been approved, but the ground hasn't been broken yet, we can count that toward our 1,118. Any vacant site where housing is permitted, underused commercial sites. So if there's a large parking lot or an empty office building or a site that really is not developed to the level that zoning allows, or where the land value is worth a lot more than the improvement value, those are the kinds of sites that we're looking for. Primarily commercial sites and not residential sites. We don't anticipate a lot of changes in single family neighborhoods. This is primarily looking at underused commercial sites. Also looking at institutional sites in the community. So there may be housing opportunities on the St. Mary's campus or other land owned by the college, or on church sites and other institutional sites, public land and so forth. And we can count accessory dwelling units. So if you have an in-law apartment and it's renting for, $1,200, $1,500, even $1,800 a month, those units may be counted as affordable units. We mentioned in an earlier slide that we need to demonstrate that we're affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a new state law, and what it means is that we can't just say in our housing element that we're going to contract out our fair housing program to a third party. We have to actually include actions in our housing element and measurable targets to look at patterns of segregation in the community and see if there's more that the town can do to have a more inclusive and economically integrated community. Every town in California has to do this now, and there's a detailed set of instructions that the state has given us, each community, to fulfill this mandate. So just a point here, moving beyond the housing element, which is the question about what happens if we don't do this? What happens if we don't have a compliant housing element, or if we submit this document to the state and they say, nope, you didn't cut it, your document's not, you haven't complied yet. There are some real consequences. There was a time 20 years ago where it didn't really matter if your housing element was in compliance or not, but the stakes are a lot higher. There is a potential for loss of state funding, not just for housing, but also for transportation, road maintenance, repaving, things like that. We face increased risk of lawsuits and fines and penalties, and those lawsuits can come from the state of California, from housing advocacy groups, or from property owners. We could even face the loss of our building and land use permitting authority. That would be kind of the extreme case, but the stakes are constantly being raised. So we just got a couple more slides here to go over the timeline for the project. We're now in fall 2021. We're undergoing what's called the needs assessment. You saw in the earlier slide the different, those 5 different buckets of what goes into a housing element. We're in the process of collecting data and evaluating our sites and our constraints. We anticipate that in winter of 2021-22, early 2022, we'll be looking at rezoning some of our commercial properties in order to close the gap between the number of units we have available and the number we need to meet our regional housing needs allocation. And the idea is to have a draft of the housing element ready by late spring of 2022. So by, say, June of 2022, we would have a document that we would submit to the state for their review. They would provide us comments. We would revise the housing element next summer and early fall, and then bring it forward to the Planning Commission and the Town Council for adoption by the end of next year, and submit it to the state in January, which is when it is due. We do have a community engagement process that will run throughout that time. We've highlighted on this slide some of the ways that you can participate. If you're here today, you are already on our mailing list, and will continue to get notification messages for meetings like these. We've talked about the Make Moraga Home email address and encourage you to please submit ideas on that site. We're going to be launching a housing survey probably the week after Thanksgiving, in maybe early December. We're developing an online tool for you to help us select housing sites and weigh in on different options. And as Afshar mentioned, we have a study session with the Town Council and Planning Commission coming up on Wednesday. We're going to continue to have study sessions with the council and meetings with the Planning Commission throughout 2022. If you are in an HOA or member of a neighborhood group or in a civic organization, we'd like to encourage your organization to participate. And if you're not happy with the housing assignment, you can let us know. Unfortunately, this is not something we control, but the state legislature does, and you can certainly contact state legislators about the process. The rest of this time that we have with you this morning, we would love for you to share issues and concerns you have related to housing, questions you might have about this process or what we're doing, ideas you might have about locations for new housing or how to meet the town's housing needs. We're going to stop with this slide and open it up for your comments and questions at this point. Again, thanks for bearing with us, and thanks for being here this morning. And do feel free to turn your microphones on, your cameras on. We have a small group, looks like there are 5 of you, and anyone have a question or comment? Karen.
Yes, I remember a number of years ago, I think it was on Camino Ricardo, that there was a project that was, I believe, went through the whole town process and then was approved, that was supposed to be for low or moderate income housing. I remember thinking that it would be for things like teachers or police officers or firemen and like that. And of course, nothing happened for a long time. And then finally, behind the shopping center, we saw construction start to happen. And then suddenly these big, fancy, the housing, I forget the name of what they called it, but you know, finally went up. And that obviously was not the low to middle income people that we were talking about. And so the rest of that land from that new group of homes down to the service station, that land is still vacant. Can you tell us if that project is still in the works, or what happened to it?
So I can try. I know that there were 2 projects that were recently built. One is the Moraga Town Center homes, and that is a type of missing middle housing. And what I've seen is that it's very successful because those units sold out really fast. And those are the types of units that we don't see a lot of in Moraga. And then the other one is what you're referring to is Camino Ricardo. They're up on the hill behind the Safeway. And those are, as you're correct, much larger. So we recently, both of those projects are part of the Moraga Center specific plan area. And Moraga Center specific plan was approved in 2020, November 2020. And what it did, the actual plan was approved in 2010. What occurred in 2020 was the implementation or the zoning. In other words, how high can you build? What's the density? What's the setbacks? Those kinds of things. So hopefully with the Moraga Center specific plan implementation, we will see more housing coming up in those areas. I know it looks vacant right now, but we currently have 2 applications in the Moraga Center specific plan. One is for single family homes, another is for like approximately 130 units at market rate, higher density. So we are beginning to see the impacts of that. Thank you.
Hello, this is Ashley. I'm on my phone in the car and can't turn on my video. Could I speak now?
Yes, and we can actually see you, Ashley, so your video is on.
Okay, I gotta be okay. I just got on my exercise class. Anyway,
Thank you. I appreciate you taking time to come and squeezing us in your busy day.
I have a couple things that I hope the town will do to incentivize or be more of the stick than the carrot for the affordable housing. One would be to do an inclusionary housing ordinance so that of any multifamily projects that are built, a certain percentage must be affordable to certain income levels. And I also think we need to reach out to the landowners. I don't want to identify a site as potential for a certain kind of housing if the landowner has no intention of ever building that kind of housing there. So I think that's an important part of the assessment of the sites. And I do think there are underdeveloped parts of the shopping centers that could be redeveloped. And the state density bonus sounds like a really great tool. I don't know if Moraga could add to the top of that, since we are kind of averse to anything more than 2 stories, and you need at least 3 for the density we need probably. Last comment is outreach to employers. You say you're having trouble getting the younger people, and I don't know if it's required to outreach to people who work in town, but it would be useful to get their input. We've got people at Safeway and all the retirement facilities, the assisted living facilities that might want to live in Moraga if they could afford to live here. And I think that's it for me now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. I actually wanted to just respond to some of your comments, which are great. We appreciate that. The inclusionary idea, for those who aren't familiar with that, would be a requirement that any housing over a certain number of units, set aside units for lower income people within the development. And that's something that the town could consider in the future, certainly one of the tools in the toolkit. Your point about making sure the landowners agree that their property is developable is really well taken. And in fact, the state of California is, they've raised the bar on us showing that as part of this process. In fact, they're even asking in some cases for a letter from the property owner saying, you know, we're okay being on this list and we have interest in developing the site. They want to make sure that we're presenting real sites and not just straw sites that are never going to get developed. One of the problems with this process in the past is, you know, cities and towns put all these sites in their database and the owners have no interest in building anything on them. So that's that is a important point and something that we'll need to consider. And thanks also for the ideas about reaching out to the employers. It's great. And Tavi, did you want to add something? Welcome.
Actually, I'm sorry that my name is out there. My name is Mohinder Datta.
Oh,
That's my grandson's name, who happens to use this iPad most often. I have a question largely related to your presentation itself. The presentation seems to suggest that the primary reason for this housing element is not in the interest of the town of Moraga, but that it is in the interest of the state of California alone. And I'm wondering why you're tending to lean in that direction, because I feel that the simple reality that over the past 10 years, the town of Moraga has grown by this insignificant population itself, which of course has not improved the density issues, but the fact that we are still, I'll call it a little itty bitty town with practically no services available to us. As I'm aging, I have less of a desire to get into my car and drive all the way over to Lafayette to get my services. But there are no medical practitioners. There are no support services that relate to physical health, to emotional health. There are no spaces in the town of Moraga for those kinds of disciplines and services to be available in this town. And I feel that the traffic that we have on the streets on Moraga Way and Moraga Road is largely caused by our not having space in the town for our lower income workforce who consistently have to drive from other cities into two congested roads, and that it is in the interest of the town itself to in fact develop this low income housing and housing for middle income people. And if that interest is there, then in fact, there should be a more forcible and more forceful resolve on the part of the town to in fact effectively zone and potentially as an extreme limit and to acquire property directly through eminent domain or other mechanisms and make available to developers who are more willing to develop in this town. And I think I've said a lot there for you to absorb at one time. And Phil, I'd love to participate in future conversations. I'm sorry, I just found out about the housing element because of a visit to the town city offices and the planning offices last week. But I'm done with my input. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Mohinder. Really appreciate it. And thank you for visiting our town offices as well. I encourage you to keep attending. And if you could, confirm the notify me, we'll keep sending you meeting notifications. There is a meeting coming up on Wednesday with the town council that you can watch. It will specifically be on affordable housing. I think, many of your comments are relevant to that topic because you've raised a lot of issues that were also part of the Moraga Center specific plan. One of the issues in the Moraga Center specific plan was that the economic dollars are going out of Moraga because there are no services, basic services in Moraga. And that's something that, many people had expressed that they wanted to see. I think that this is part of a larger question that we're all trying to have here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to add to thank you for those comments. And I think you picked up on something. We probably need to watch our messaging more carefully. And I agree with everything you said. We've, I think, been caught in this situation where the state and ABAG have kind of taken over and given us this assignment without a lot of opportunity for the town to kind of make its own decisions. And so a lot of it is kind of that resistance of the their forecasts for how large Moraga will grow in the next 20 years are not nearly as high as the 1,000 units we're being asked to plan for. So it may be, it's I think philosophically where we completely agree with what you said. It may be an issue of the magnitude, and is it really 1,118 units? Why isn't it 500 units or 400 units or a size that's more scaled to our community? I know I myself I had to write a bunch of appeal letters for cities that didn't, they didn't like their number and they formally appealed. So I'm kind of, my mindset has always been, wait, the state's method doesn't work in our community. And, we have fire issues and other things. So I really, I just appreciate what the points you made are really valid and really important. And I think we need to do a better job elevating those messages and talking points as part of helping people understand why this is good for the town and not just something the state is making us do. So thank you for that.
And I also want to say something else, and that is that one of the things that we've heard from the regional agencies is that since there are a lot of barriers in Moraga, we have not seen the types of increases that we should as a region. So I think what I've also learned is that we need to allow for more housing and allow for a greater variety of housing and different demographics in Moraga.
Thanks very much. Let's hear from Kendall. Good morning.
Morning, you guys. I've seen you before. I was at the last meeting, and you guys may not like this, but first of all, the poll that you're taking is disingenuous because there's 5 people, maybe 4.
Yeah.
The last meeting there were 8, and when you say it's an 8% vote when one person votes, that's misleading. This entire meeting is misleading. The not misleading point is that in 2010, which you've already brought up, the Moraga Center plan was not adopted. It would have created a lot of zoning at that time, which then would have kept Moraga out of trouble. Moraga right now is violating state code by not creating developments when they could have a long time ago. They were supposed to meet development standards that were not met, which now has put Moraga in jeopardy. We only have until January 1st, 2023, where all other cities have 3 years. So let's get it real. The town council has failed the town for 20 years. The town manager just recently, when you're talking about the Moraga Center specific plan where you're going to get all kinds of development, no developer is going to develop because the town management, the town staff set up criteria of setbacks and height restrictions that violate State Bill 330. I'm not a lawyer, but I've read all those bills, and Moraga is in direct violation of the state. Now, when we incorporated, which I was involved in 1974, we agreed to deal with all of the state's issues that we are discussing right now. And because Moraga has failed its citizens by not providing low income and affordable income housing, we are now under violation of state code. And that's the plain fact. And you can't change that. So this entire meeting to me was a whitewash. You're not telling the truth. And number one. Number two, I'm sorry, I'm in my car, I have to move. Number two, I'm sorry, just a second. Number two, the reason we are where we are at is because I'm a commercial property owner. Okay, I'm making an announcement. I'm building a 10-story building, and let the state sue you. I will put commercial and residential in there. So I'm part of the Moraga Center specific plan, and I can tell you that the town has put barricades in front of development. It's not anyone else but the town council and the planning commission. The planning commission is appointed by the town council and is made up of people who don't want 2 stories. They don't want development. And these are they're kind of conditions of our culture that need to change in Moraga. We do not have any low income housing. We do not have affordable housing. We have very little high density housing, and we have stopped that development because of the town council and the planning commission. We are in jeopardy with the state. As Mr. Miller explained, we are in jeopardy of having the state come in and take over our planning department. Now, that is ridiculous for us to be in that situation. Thank you very much.
Kendall, can I ask you a follow-up question? Just
Yes, sir.
because I'm curious if you have, I mean, what would be your solution to what you just laid out? I mean, do you feel like changing zoning standards is something we should be doing, or I'm sort of wanting to follow up.
Let me give you a timeline like you were giving. If we had done the zoning that we should have done in 2010, we wouldn't be required to create 1,100 homes now. Your comment about, hey, there might be something different, go to an appeal. No, we're screwed because we do have property that can be developed in Moraga and we haven't. Okay, the towns that you probably wrote appeals for were probably more constrained and didn't have as much development possibility. We do, and we did, and we didn't. So when I'm answering that question, I'm basically saying, yes, I do have answers, and I do think the Moraga Center specific plan was adjusted by the town staff too much to prevent development. We need to revise that center specific plan again and get it into consistency with SB 330, SB 9, and SB 10, which right now it violates.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to suggest that we meet with you offline, separately from this meeting this morning and talk through some of this stuff. Given that you're a property owner in the Moraga Center specific plan area, you have commercial property, you have an interest in seeing something happen. We have interest in seeing something happen there too. So let's meet separately from this meeting and talk about that.
I would very much appreciate that. I have been living here for 68 years. No one from town staff has ever asked me to come in for a face-to-face meeting until right now. So thank you very much, number one. Number two, I think you really need to reconsider. You've not gotten to enough people. No one in town knows what's going on. I rent to people, have tenants who live in, they don't have a clue of what's going on. No information is out there.
We would love to talk to your tenants too. Yep.
I'm sorry, I have to leave now. I have another appointment to go to.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about
Thank you
that,
so
but
much for attending.
This has been very nice and very helpful. I very much agree with the last person who was talking about it. I'm aware of those issues and I am in complete agreement with them. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ashley or Linda, did you have any final comments or questions or feedback before we wrap up for the day?
I'm just trying to learn what's going on, so I don't have any questions or comments.
Thank you. And Ashley? Okay, so Kendall, did you want to make any closing comments or final comments? Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap this up. And
actually, Mr. Miller, I want to appreciate the way you ran the meeting. And Anwar, I don't agree with everything you say, but you guys are very professional. And I don't hate anybody. I'm not mad at anybody, but I do think that we're in a situation that needs to be corrected.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. And we will reach out to you to talk to you about your property. Okay. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming today. And we look forward to your continued participation in this. One of the reasons that folks may not have heard of this yet is we are new in the process. We've only been at this for just around 2 months now. So for our first meeting with the council and commission was October 6th. So we're still in the early stages. And look forward to keeping everybody apprised of what's happening as we move ahead. Afsha, did you want to have any other comments?
No, I really appreciate that everybody took time out on a busy Saturday. You know, the town is trying to outreach, but I would also encourage each and every one of you to let your neighbors and friends know. We do have a dedicated website, Make Moraga Home. The meetings are listed there, the process is listed there, and you can also sign up for Notify Me. So I really appreciate everybody coming today and getting informed. And please email us with any questions that you have. We're here to engage with you and to make sure that you are heard. Thank you.
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.